Welcome everyone to CoasterGuy23 review number 9. Today we'll be talking about a personal favorite of mine and in my opinion, one of the most underrated rides in the world. It's time to talk about Twisted Timbers at King's Dominion. Twisted Timbers is an iBox conversion of the original wooden coaster Hurler that opened at King's Dominion in 1994. Hurler had a height of 83 feet, a speed of 50 miles an hour, and just over 3,000 feet of track. It was manufactured by International Coasters Inc. Who, you might ask? Exactly. In fact, International Coasters Inc. only ever built 2 roller coasters, and that's the Hurler at King's Dominion, and you guessed it, the Hurler at Carowinds. That being said, if you desire to experience the original Hurler, the one at Carowinds is still in operation, so go check that out if your heart desires for some reason. While I never had the opportunity to do the King's Dominion Hurler, I had done the Carowinds Hurler, and honestly, it was a bad ride, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't super rough, it was just pretty boring and didn't really do anything. King's Dominions, however, is even worse ranked on Captain Coaster than Carowinds, nearly 200 spots lower, and by all accounts, the ride was not doing well at all and needed a major makeover. So, they went with the full RMC iBox conversion, and it worked out beautifully. If you ask me, they should have done it to the Carowinds 1-2 by now, but that's a conversation for probably another video. Moving on from Hurler now and focusing on Twisted Timbers, obviously it was manufactured by RMC with their iBox track and swing axle trains. If you watched my Steel Vengeance or Iron Gwazi review or Wildcat's Revenge, you know how much I love this combination. Twisted Timbers has a height of 111 feet, just tacking on about 30 feet from the original Hurler, a speed of 54 miles per hour, and a track length of 3,361 feet. Pretty small for a major thrill coaster, but then again, Hurler did not give RMC a lot of land and structure to work with. I am curious though how present-day RMC would have attacked RMCing Hurler, as it seems like in the present day they are much more willing to tack on additional structure if it makes more sense from a layout perspective. Kinda like what they did for Wildcat's Revenge and Iron Gwazi, where the new RMC layout doesn't really at all follow the track path of the original wooden coasters that they replaced. Maybe one day, if they get around to RMCing the Hurler at Carowinds, they take a more modern day RMC style approach, where they're more willing to add more structure and follow a whole new track path, which would give them the ability to go taller, faster, or longer. Food for thought. Now let's jump into Twisted Timbers elements. I count on Twisted Timbers 22 total elements, consisting of 16 airtime movements, 3 inversions, and 3 maneuvers. So a very airtime focused ride here. Even for an RMC, this is very airtime heavy, most comparable to Steel Vengeance. Twisted Timbers has a drop to brake time of 46.98 seconds, which is about average, maybe a little slightly below. 47 seconds is pretty good for a coaster that's only 110 feet tall. By the time you hit the brakes on this thing, you're kind of all out of speed, so there's not really much else you can do to extend the layout. 22 elements and only 47 seconds of prime ride time is also insane. When you average that out, that's like 2.5 seconds per element. That has to be some kind of record. What I love about these 2018 RMC Steel Vengeance and Twisted Timbers, and why they're still probably some of my favorite RMCs to this day, is just how many elements they take in such a quick amount of time. It's just a ride where everything is happening so quickly that it takes multiple rides to really get a sense for each element and how it feels. You can also tell that Twisted Timbers has a lot of just straight up, straight ahead airtime. 3 camelbacks and 4 bunnies already, including some trick tracks and some other things to mix up airtime as well. Obviously, if you're going to be this heavy on airtime, you need to make sure that that airtime hits. And this being an RMC, there's a good chance of that, but we'll get our first idea of that when we look at the force chart here. Taking a look, first we see that the force chart is very spiky, meaning lots of elements in a very short amount of time and in very quick succession. Long transitions and long elements are generally avoided, and instead we're in for a high event, action-packed ride. You'll also see that a lot of the valleys hit a very high negative G value, especially in the 10 to 20 second range. You can see 3 very large areas underneath the curve, indicating very large amount of upward momentum, aka airtime. You'll also see that a lot of the positive G crests do not, or actually none of them, cross the 3.5 G threshold. So Twisted Timbers is not a ride that focuses on positives at all, but that's kind of in line for other RMCs, but Twisted Timbers is probably even worse than those if I'm being honest. But then again, this park does have Pantherian/Intimidator 305 in it, and that ride probably has enough positives to cover every other coaster in that park. So, positives really aren't that needed on Twisted Timbers. I like positives, but they're not my favorite thing ever on a roller coaster, and there's just more important things that I look for, like airtime, pacing, how good the layout is, first drop, etc. And Twisted Timbers has plenty of that. As always, I encourage you to flip back and forth between this vertical force chart, the POV, and the previous slides so that you know what element is actually being represented on the force chart and where. And with that being said, let's jump into the POV review of Twisted Timbers. Starting off here, you kind of have your typical RMC style lift hill, except it's a little bit shallower than most, but same speed, same noise, same blah blah whatever. And first up, we have what I think is Twisted Timbers' most unique feature compared to other roller coasters, the barrel roll down drop. Basically, it's just a giant 0G roll that has a huge elevation change as you kind of roll downward and then you hit the bottom of the first drop. I love a 0G roll as much as the next guy, but I gotta be honest, I really don't know how I feel about this element. It does not give me a first drop vibe at all. all. It just kind of feels like a stereotypical inversion that starts off very slowly and you kind of pick up speed as you go towards the bottom. In the back row, it's kind of cool because at least you get a little bit more whip because the front of the train kind of pulls you through that roll. So I will give it credit that it's really unique, but at the end of the day, I just kind of feel like it's neutering what would be a start off with the bang moment in the first drop to feel like just any regular old inversion, if that makes sense. Like when just comparing it as an element, some of the first drops I've covered on this channel, it's not a better element than Steve's first drop. It's not a better element than Iron Gwazi's first drop. It's not a better element than Velocicoaster's top hat. The list goes on. Again, it just feels like they missed out on an opportunity to start off the ride with the bang and kind of just made it into a regular old inversion. Like I said, I appreciate the uniqueness and I definitely can see why it stands out to the GP, but at the end of the day, I just think a pre-drop with like a whippy drop after it, kind of like Outlaw Run or Wildfire, just would have been a better element than this, and that would have made the ride better. Again, I don't want to hate too much on this, because again, I'm glad that RMC tried to be different, but I just don't know if it worked out here in my opinion, and I would have just preferred a regular drop with a bit of a pre-drop section. Up next, we have a very tiny little airtime pop. I'm calling this a step in because there's a little lateral movement at the crest of the airtime hill, and it just kind of steps you into the next element, quite literally. For this element on most of your rides, it's over before you even realize it started. However, it does give you an airtime score of 5.49, which is something. It's not much, as we're relying really heavily on negative G value here. It only gets to about 0.4 negative Gs, but again, it's something. You'll feel it. There's a lot of these airtime pops on this ride, some stronger than others, but because there's so many of them and they kind of deliver the same sensation, I'll just be listing the airtime score for a lot of them and buzzing through them real quick. The airtime score will just give you an indication of how hard that specific moment is going to hit. The step in leads you into the next element, which is an overbank turn. This overbank turn has got to be one of the fastest overbank turns ever taken on a roller coaster. At the end of the day, you are coming off a 100-foot drop, and this overbank turn is maybe, 30 feet tall? So yeah, of course you're going to whip through it. This element is just okay. It doesn't really do much snap or whip, but it does keep a good pace and it doesn't waste too much of your time, and it kind of gets you onto more airtime hills, which are a lot more fun than this element. Up next, we have a step out, which is a mirrored version of the step in that we just did. The step in steps you into the overbank, this steps you out of the overbank. A very similar airtime score here of 4.94, so again, not much. But I just appreciate RMC adding this in instead of just doing a full overbank turn to cover the whole 180-degree turn. Just adding that airtime pop in and out of the overbank just gives this ride that extra boost in my opinion. And that leads into our first Camelback Hill, and this is where Twisted Timbers really starts cooking. This first one has an airtime score of 45.81, which is pushing some of my top airtime moments. With a max negative G of negative 0.9 and being held for almost 2 full seconds, this thing sends you flying. This Camelback is followed up by a nearly identical Camelback with an airtime score of 48.88, which is even stronger technically, but it's basically the exact same airtime hill. And that's followed up by yet another identical Camelback hill, this time an airtime score of 42.16. Again, very similar sensation to the first two. I'm going to play this whole sequence back in slow motion, because I believe it truly is one of the best element sequences on any roller coaster. If you're going to come to me and say that this is repetitive and the third hill feels unnecessary or whatever you're going to say, I really just don't know what to tell you. Maybe you just hate fun. All three of these send you flying, and hey, that's why we all ride roller coasters at the end of the day, don't we? Now, when I compare this to other element sequences, is it better than the first 3 elements on Steel Vengeance? I don't think so. Better than the first drop of 2 Camelbacks on El Toro? Probably not, but the rest of the layout will make up for that. Going all the way back to when Twisted Timbers was first announced, I remember there were some people saying, I would like a 0G stall in place of one of these hills, maybe replace the second one with something different. But no, going 3 back-to-back Camelbacks, in my opinion, was absolutely the correct move, and this is the best part and most memorable part of Twisted Timbers to me. Following that beautiful sequence, we have another step in. This is pretty similar maneuver wise to the first step in we talked about, as it kind of does a lateral move to the right as you prepare for the next element. However, with a significantly lower airtime score of only 0.66, you're really not going to feel any upward lift on this one at all. Following that, we have our second inversion on the ride, which is a cutback. To me, this is just a really solid, fun, whippy inversion. It feels like it's going to be an overbank turn as you're entering it, but then all of a sudden you find yourself 180 degrees upside down. It's pretty fun. Not super memorable or not going to make my top inversions or anything, but a good moment nonetheless. It's actually pretty similar in shaping to Steel Vengeance's second inversion, except Steel Vengeance is going downward. And I probably prefer that one just because, like I said, you kind of enter it going upwards and then do a quick snap. But this one's still pretty fun too, although it's a little bit more flowy. Don't expect any hang time on this thing either. It's definitely more about the speed. And next up, we do a step out from the cutback. And unlike our previous step ins and step outs, this one is actually very pronounced. And that's reflected in this element's airtime score, scoring a 22.0. 13.09. When I say more pronounced, just look how much higher off the ground this step out is than the previous couple step in, step outs. That's what allows us to get that much better airtime than the previous step in and step outs gave. And this step out is the first element of a long series of very quickly taken bunny style airtime hills. The first of which is just traditional bunny hill. However, it does end higher than it starts, so you're going to get more airtime in the front. Being that this is a back row file, this only scored a 13.04, which is not nothing. It's an ejector pop. That leads into the one and only trick track, which is basically just two bunny hills that are outer banked in the opposite direction of one another, creating a fun shuffling movement as you navigate the two bunny hills. Of course, I consider these two separate elements, being that they're two distinct moments on the force chart. The first part of the trick track has an airtime score of 13.63, and the second part of the trick track has an airtime score of 11.6. So again, two ejector pops that you're definitely going to notice. Side-to-side movement introduced by the trick track also adds some extra flavor to these as well. And the final airtime hill of this little stretch of bunny hills is just another typical bunny hill. This is bunny 2, element 11. This bunny hill actually gives the best airtime in this stretch of airtime hills, with an airtime score of 30.27. Just like with the camelbacks, I'm going to replay this sequence again in slow motion, just to admire the sheer beauty of it. 5 straight airtime moments, all scoring over 10 plus, with 2 scoring over 20 and 1 scoring over 30. Earlier, I was talking about best element sequences and how El Toro's first drop in 2 camelbacks probably beat Twisted Timber's 3 camelbacks. Well, when Twisted Timbers follows up the 3 camelbacks with this, El Toro has no answer for this. Just boom, 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 airtime after airtime. It is exhilarating, it's fun, and I just can't get enough of it. This is why the 2018 arms are some of my favorite. It's the stretches of elements like this, like Steel Vengeance's finale, or this stretch of airtime hills that these guys absolutely thrive off of. And this is what I look for in a roller coaster. Powerful airtime taken in quick succession. I just love it so much. This stretch of airtime hills even mixes it up a little better, providing some laterals and some side-to-side movement with the trick track. I just can't say enough good things about the stretch of airtime hills, especially when it's hauling at night or if it's a hot day out. Just ripping through this is just a feeling like no other. I know it's not going to be for everyone, and not everyone loves to be violently tossed, but for what I'm looking for, a good pace, quick things happening all the time, strong airtime and not weak floater. This is what I live for. And technically, the stretch of airtime hills isn't even over with yet, because now we take this quick turn to the right and enter what I call a twist and shout. I wasn't really quite sure what to call this element at first, but I mean, it meets the criteria of a twist and shout, a hard bank turn followed by a quick flip out followed by another hard bank turn. It just doesn't quite have the extreme snap that some of the other twist and shouts do, like Iron Gwazi or Velocicoaster. But I mean, it meets the criteria and the maneuver movement is kind of similar, so I'm running with twist and shout. This twist and shout has an airtime score of 15.54, so add it to this bonkers stretch of airtime moments that this ride continues to deliver over and over again. Twist and shouts have become a personal favorite of mine. It's letting you not just love a snappy maneuver combined with some outward banked airtime. Up next, we have yet another bunny hill, this one with a score of 14.9. They just never seem to end on this ride. The combination of pacing and just repeated, strong ejector airtime pops is just so hard for any other roller coaster to match. For element number 17, RMC finally decided to give us a break from the ejector pops and went with the 0G roll. This is your pretty standard RMC 0G roll. It feels almost identical to the ones you can find on Steel Vengeance. It's not as good as the one on Wildcat's Revenge. Those are taken with a little bit more speed, but still, just a fun inversion. You know I love me an RMC 0G roll, and in this case, it's a nice change of pace. As the ride winds down here, we have this interesting little turnaround maneuver that consists of 2 separate elements. And funny enough, this first part of it here is actually airtime. I kind of struggled with this one in preparing for this video, because I really just don't see where the airtime comes from. I mean, I guess I see a little bit of a dive and a little bit of outward braking curvature, but other than that, I got nothing. But upon cross-examining my files with other files on the beautiful rideforcesdb.com, every file says the same thing. The first part of this turnaround is an airtime moment with a little bit of an ejector pop, and the second part of this maneuver turnaround is just a maneuver with no airtime. I really don't understand it, but the numbers don't lie. Airtime is very measly, don't get me wrong, only 2.11, but it's there. I mean, obviously, if I didn't notice it on the ride and didn't think it was an airtime moment, it's not very noticeable, but it is there. This element really is meant to more be a maneuver, if I had to guess, and it is kind of a fun little dive. You can definitely tell at this point the ride is starting to lose its speed, and you need to get to the brake run as quickly as possible. The second element of the turnaround has the same kind of story, except there's no actual airtime to be found, and it just kind of feels like an overbank turn. Following that, you have this little shimmy right here. It's so unnoticeable, and it's over so quickly that you don't even notice it doesn't give you any airtime. So it's technically a maneuver, but it's really just meant to get you in line with the final brake run. And then finally, for good measure, one final bunny hill for the show, and of course it's pretty strong with an airtime score of -15. Well, strong for a bunny hill at least, as this thing hits almost -1 G of negative G forces and just gives you that one final reminder of what this ride exactly just did to your body. Then as the Kings Dominion logo appears, you have a final brake hop, which is an airtime score of 0.83, and that concludes the POV review for Twisted Timbers at Kings Dominion. Here's a recap of all Twisted Timbers' airtime moments that we talked about during the POV. It had 16 of them for a total score of 287.02 and 12.7 seconds of under 0G airtime. To put the airtime score into reference, Twisted Timbers currently has the third highest airtime score of any coaster I've ridden, only being beat by Steel Vengeance to Cedar Point, which I've already reviewed, and a roller coaster I'm soon going to review, Airy Force 1. Twisted Timbers beats out the 4th place coaster, Iron Gwazi, by roughly 4 points worth of airtime score. Now, Iron Gwazi gets to that score using a lot less elements, so maybe that counts for something, and some people might prefer that versus just a lot of really choppy airtime moments like Twisted Timbers has, but to me, the airtime score declaring them about equal is exactly why I built the model in the first place. Twisted Timbers doesn't have the height and speed that Steel Vengeance and Iron Gwazi do that allows them to have big, sweeping, sustained ejector moments at the beginning of their ride. So to make up for that and achieve an airtime score that's in the galaxy of those two rides, Twisted Timbers offers repeated ejector pops, and a lot of them. Twisted Timbers has a stretch of 3 airtime hills all scoring over 40, which is impressive, and a stretch of 7 airtime hills that all score over 10, with a bunch of those scoring over 15, also very impressive. Those two stretches carry the bulk of Twisted Timbers' airtime score, along with a 15-point bunny hill at the end. When considering this ride is only 110 feet tall and 48 seconds long, Twisted Timbers' airtime profile is absolutely outstanding, and it is among one of the best airtime coasters that I've ever ridden. Does it do enough else, though, to warrant a very good spot in my rankings? Well, we're about to find out. First up, we have laterals. And Twisted Timbers, like most RMC coasters, is not really lateral focused. It has a couple moments with the step in and step outs where you kind of get that lateral move as you have airtime, but it's really just not a lateral focused ride at all. Most of the airtime hills are straight ahead, and even the trick track, which has some side-to-side movement, really doesn't do that much in terms of laterals rather than just fun maneuvering. So laterals gonna get a nice 2.5 out of 10. Next up, we have presentation, and Twisted Timbers' presentation is not bad. Mostly 2-train operations, and I've never had a problem with the ops, but I have heard days where they're not so great. Like a lot of RMC coasters, Twisted Timbers has a strict no loose article policy, but there are free double-sided lockers in use, so I'll get some bonus points for that. The coaster also looks nice from the midway. It's got a big Twisted Timbers sign. The queue is not bad with some decent shade. Overall, the coaster just looks solid in the midway, so for presentation, I'm going to go a little bit above average. Up next, we have theming, and technically there is a story that Twisted Timbers is trying to tell about some haunted apple orchard, but even I'm not familiar with it, and I've been on this coaster a bunch, so if I'm not familiar with it, and I've been on your ride a lot, and I'm looking out for a theme because I'm a coaster enthusiast, then the average guest is just not going to get a theme come across at all. The theme also does not contribute to the on-ride experience at all, so for theming, I have no choice but to score it extremely below average. Next up, we have trains, and I've already touched on the new gen RMC trains on a bunch of videos on my channel, Wildcat's Revenge, Iron Gwazi, and Steel Vengeance, so I'm not going to harp on them too much here, but I just overall think these are really comfortable, and I might be in the minority on that opinion, but I think they ride great, they track great, they give a comfortable airtime experience, the shin guards don't bother me, so for trains, big thumbs up for me, above average. Up next, we have propulsion, and this is just your standard RMC lift hill, but even shallower than normal, so for propulsion, I'm going to go extremely below average. Up next, we have positives, and Twisted Timbers, even for RMC standards, does not do the best in positives. It barely even gets over 3 Gs on most of its valleys. Most rides have the most sustained positives after the first drop or after their first sustained element, and Twisted Timbers' drop is so shallow and its first element is so short and quick that it really just doesn't have a good chance at ever having good positives. At least the positives are consistent, that's one good thing I can say, but still positives way below average in Twisted Timbers and even below average for an RMC. Up next, we have inversions, and Twisted Timbers has 3 inversions: the barrel roll down drop, the cutback, and the 0G roll at the end. My personal favorite of these is the cutback, and like I said, the barrel roll down drop is a little bit underwhelming for me and just kind of feels like an average inversion. But still, I can never discredit 2 really good RMC 0G rolls, and I like the cutback, and Twisted Timbers' 3 inversions are a really nice change of pace from the rest of the ride. So for inversions, I'm going to go slightly above average, although I can admit I'm being probably a little generous there. Up next, we have variety, and I think a lot of people will really punish Twisted Timbers here, but the variety isn't that bad. Yes, it's a lot of straight-ahead airtime hills, but it does mix up the airtime a little bit with the twist and shout, the trick track, and the step in, step out. So it's not just you're like the same exact repeated airtime sensation over and over again. Plus, the 3 inversions and the overbank turn do enough to break up the airtime moments so that they don't get exhausting. Twisted Timbers doesn't have the variety of the more modern-day RMCs like Iron Gwazi, but still compared to most roller coasters, especially stuff like from B&M, Twisted Timbers' variety is still above average, in my opinion. Yes, it's a lot of airtime, but it mixes in other things as well to just keep it fresh. Having unique elements like the barrel roll down drop and the cutback helps out in the variety score as well. Up next, we have maneuvers, and Twisted Timbers maneuvers really aren't that impressive. It's an overbank, a shimmy that tries to be an airtime hill but fails miserably, and a turnaround where half of it's airtime and half is just a very small overbank turn. These maneuvers keep a good speed, I guess, but I don't really have too much good to say about them. Maneuvers definitely below average. That was a lot of tough categories for Twisted Timbers, so now let's get into some good stuff, starting off with smoothness. Twisted Timbers, like most RMC IBAX coasters, is gloss smooth, absolute perfection, 0 issues, 10 out of 10. Up next is pacing, and this, in my opinion, is what people undersell the most about Twisted Timbers. Maybe it's just because I got a lot of night rides one night, or just the trains I was on that day, but this thing absolutely flies. It loses maybe a little bit of speed at the end, but for 90% of the layout, all the way up to, I'd probably say, the maneuver at the end, you just are absolutely flying through these airtime moments. The sense of speed is just so good, especially on a 110-foot tall coaster that only goes 54 miles per hour. There's no element I can point to on this ride that really gives you any kind of break from the pacing either, which is what a good pace coaster is all about. So for pacing, I'm going a 9 out of 10, very above average. Maybe Twisted Timbers' pacing just gets forgotten about because its Giga Coaster next door neighbor has some of the best pacing of any coaster in the world, but I will go to the grave saying that Twisted Timbers' pacing is extremely underrated. And on a similar note, we have density, and Twisted Timbers, like I said, is one of the kings of just doing element after element after element with absolutely 0 breaks in between. No straight track or drawn out transitions on this one. It's action packed, it's high event, it tosses you around, and it keeps you entertained. RMC coasters always excel in density just because they have such high element counts and they take those elements in rapid succession, but even on that standard, Twisted Timbers does extremely well. In fact, I go to say that it has one of the most dense layouts of any coaster I've ever ridden. Up next, we have duration, and for Twisted Timbers, its duration is above average, I would say, but is definitely not exceptional. However, with only 110 feet of height and going 54 miles per hour, there's not much else you can really do to extend the duration because you are just out of speed at that point. And of course, you don't want to ruin the pacing of the ride. So for duration, I'm always going to give smaller coasters a bit more leniency because they just don't have the resources to have a better duration, if that makes sense. So for Twisted Timbers duration, at 48 seconds and only having a height of 110 miles per hour, that's pretty good. So I'm going to give it a solid 6.5 to 7 out of 10. Next up, we have airtime strength, and we saw in both the POV breakdown and the force chart that Twisted Timbers pushes -1G of airtime on multiple occasions, and all of its hills provide some sort of ejector airtime, and there's no real floater to be seen on this ride. The speed hills are whatever, but other than that, all those other airtime hills give you a really satisfying airtime feeling, pulling your butt off the seat and your thighs into the lap bar. And leading into airtime quantity, this ride does this repeatedly, with 16 airtime moments out of 22 elements, and all that happening in 47 seconds. I don't know how you could pack any more airtime into Twisted Timbers layout than you already have. Quantity and strength are both a tick below though, because when you compare this ride to something like Steve just has those couple of big sustained ejector moments at the beginning of the ride that it takes with all that speed from its 200-foot drop. Twisted Timbers just can't quite compete with that. Still though, in both airtime strength and airtime quantity, as I've harped on time and time again in this video, Twisted Timbers is truly exceptional. To recap, Twisted Timbers' main calling card obviously is airtime. There's lots of it and it comes at you fast. That's not to say Twisted Timbers doesn't mix in a couple maneuvers and inversions every now and again. When you factor in the breakneck pace, along with those 2 stretches of airtime hills that I mentioned previously, along with the ride being glass smooth, this is a world-class roller coaster here. It just doesn't have the benefit of being super tall or super fast, and things like duration suffer for that. As of June 2026, Twisted Timbers is currently ranked number 24 of 1,955 roller coasters in the Captain Coaster database, placing it in the 98.8 percentile of all ranked roller coasters on the website. For me, Twisted Timbers comes in at number 4 of my 222 roller coaster credits. If you recall, I ranked Wildcat's Revenge at number 4 in that video, so what the heck happened? Well, I said that Twisted Timbers, Velocicoaster, and Wildcat's Revenge were all in a very tight grouping, and I didn't know which one I prefer on any given day, so right now I've got a Twisted Timbers 4, Velocicoaster 5, and Wildcat's Revenge number 6. Steve and Gwazi are still 1 and 2, and number 3 I have not reviewed yet. Obviously you can tell by their ranking, I'm very high on Twisted Timbers compared to most other people, and I think it is the best ride at King's Dominion, which I know is somewhat of a hot take. Twisted Timbers is actually very similar stylistically to Steel Vengeance, except Steel Vengeance is taller, faster, longer, has more elements, and 2 giant sustained ejector moments at the beginning. Still though, this ride has so much going for it between the pacing and those stretches of airtime hills that I cannot stress enough how good they are. This is absolutely a world-class coaster in my opinion, and a top-tier RMC, and you should absolutely go to King's Dominion and try it out for yourself, especially if you have a similar taste in roller coasters to me. That'll conclude CoasterGuy23 review number 9 on Twisted Timbers at King's Dominion. If you want to learn more about my roller coaster experiences, such as my full ranking of all my credits, park visits and trip reports, ride counts, force charts, and more, find me on the sites listed in front of you. A link to each will be in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.